Hello and welcome to episode 55 of the Monday Night Review. I'm really excited because last week I released the first ever mini-sode. I've shamelessly stolen that term from My Favourite Murder because it fits so well. It's a mini-sode, it's a small episode. So if you are a Patreon, you will have heard it, hopefully. There are 3 tiers of Patreon. One is literally just so you can hear the episodes ad-free. So they don't get mini-sodes, but the other 2. The middle tier, you get some mini-sodes, not all, and the top tier, you get everything because you're amazing. So I'm excited about that. I've just been doing a bit of research for the second episode, the second mini-sode, and then I realised that I was running out of time to actually record this episode. Now this episode, once again, this week's episode, I thought was going to be really short. Got carried away. It's quite long. Get a cup of tea, get a cup of coffee, get in a cushy chair, or walk your dogs. I'm not here to tell you what to do. Because today we're going to be talking about Robert Leroy Parker and Harry Alonzo Longabaugh, I think is how you say it, better known as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I love the name Butch, and I'm sorry to say it. I try and be an unbiased voice of factual accuracy where possible. But I am going to have rose-tinted glasses about these guys because I absolutely adore the film Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid with Paul Newman and Robert Redford. I cry at the end every time. My husband and I quote it to each other, and it's just an incredible film. If you haven't watched it, you should watch it. If you don't think you like westerns, you should watch it. What dreamy, dreamy casting. Paul Newman, Butch Cassidy, Robert Redford, Sundance Kid, Catherine Ross. Literally the one celebrity who, if I could click my fingers and look like her, it would be Catherine Ross. She's just incredible. So yeah, I went through this hesitant in case I found anything really horrible about them, but they're amazing. So obviously also criminals. So let's start with Butch. Got to start with Butch if you're talking about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Robert Leroy Parker, he's born on the 13th of April 1866 in Beaver, Utah Territory, and he's the first of 13 children of English immigrants, Maximilian Parker and Anne Campbell Gillies. Now, his mother and father's families had converted to the Mormon faith while still living in the UK, which I guess, of course it was a thing, but I didn't really think about it. So Maximilian Parker was, Butch's father, was 12 years old when his family arrived in Salt Lake City in 1856 as Mormon pioneers. They had travelled across the country with all their belongings in a handcart. The cold had proved too much for Maximilian's father, who was just found one morning frozen in his blanket. Anne Gillies was born and lived in Tyneside in northeast England and immigrated to the US with her family in 1859 when she was 14. Now, the couple are married in July 1865 and Maximilian becomes a very successful businessman, and Robert Parker and his siblings grow up on his parents' ranch, which is near Circleville, and his father was, a successful businessman, and they had a nice childhood. Now, I have it written here, though I think perhaps this is wrong terminology. There is a lot of vagaries. I have it here that Parker fled his home. I don't think so. So this either happens... What happens is, this all takes place either on a ranch where Parker, Butch, goes to work as an early teen, or it happens on his father's dairy ranch. That's a bit of a grey area. But either way, he's working on a ranch as a young teen, And he meets a cattle thief called Mike Cassidy. And Mike Cassidy, the whole thing about Butch Cassidy, as he then becomes, the whole thing about Robert Parker is that he is charming and a people person and fun to be around. And Mike Cassidy, this cattle thief that he meets, kind of takes this boy under his wing, shows him how to shoot a gun, how to train horses, how to rustle cattle. And Mike then gets into trouble with the law and has to skip out of town. And as far as we know, Butch never sees him again, but does change his last name to unofficially to Cassidy. And many believe that this is in honour to his friend. But he wouldn't do this until a bit later. Now, I've put here unofficially. At the time, and this is kind of the end era of the Wild West as we know it. But one of the things that's going to make this episode confusing, and which makes talking about these people is confusing, is that everyone just changes their names or uses nicknames or pseudonyms loads. So it does get really confusing. So bear with me. But yeah, that's where Robert Parker will eventually change his name. His last name's Cassidy, and everyone thinks it's in honour of Mike Cassidy. By the age of 16, Parker's considered a really good horseman and a better shot. He's a solid man with a really jovial, pleasant personality, and this will stand him in good stead throughout his life. He works on several ranches in addition to a brief apprenticeship with a butcher in Rock Springs, Wyoming. And that is where he gets his nickname, Butcher, Butch. So that's when he starts, when he's 16, he starts getting called Butch. So his first run-in with the law happens in 1880, and it is a very typical of Butch Cassidy run-in with the law. He travels to a clothes shop in another town and he finds it closed. Now, it's not like now. If I want to go to the next big town over, from me, it's 20 minutes in the car. To go to the next town to your clothes shop in 1880, he would have ridden his horse, and it would have taken a long time. So Butch, undeterred by finding the shop closed, breaks in, steals a pair of jeans and some pie, very importantly, and he leaves an IOU on the pay desk, promising to pay on his next visit, and signs it. The dickweed shop owner presses charges, but Cassidy's acquitted by the jury. He probably had to pay for the jeans or whatever, but they're like, come on, it's not ideal. He did leave a note. It wasn't sneaky or whatever. So he continues to work on ranches until 1884, when he moves to Telluride, Colorado. Now, he allegedly is seeking work, but some believe that he's perhaps delivering stolen horses to buyers. Now, some people have it that Butch Cassidy is basically like the Wild West Robin Hood, where all his crimes are kind of taken from big corporations or big companies that aren't maybe ethically great, and he's helping small ranches, other men who struggle to get work. You can make up your own mind about that. But yeah, so we don't really know whether he was stealing horses, whether he was really getting ranch work. Cassidy just leads a cowboy's life in Wyoming and Montana before returning to Telluride in 1887, where he meets Matt Warner, who is the owner of a racehorse, Betty. And Cassidy and Warner go and take Betty to numerous races and events, and they divide the winnings up between them, and she does really well. It's not enough to keep Cassidy happy, though, and his first bank robbery takes place on the 24th of June, 1889, when he robs the San Miguel Valley Bank in Telluride, Colorado, with Warner and two of the McCarty brothers. Now, Telluride's located in the San Juan Mountains, and it's a wild mining town full of prospectors, and the town streets are lined with brothels, saloons, gambling houses, places for you to spend your money. And the San Miguel Bank is right bang in the middle of town. And if you look at it, I'll try and put a photo up on social media. It literally looks, for those of us who watch Westerns and think that they are fact, it is literally like you can see where they get the idea for the shootouts that happen in the middle of town on this dusty street with board houses and saloons either side. It looks like that. So it's believed that Butch and his men robbed a stagecoach in Denver on their way into town. And then when they arrive in town, they kind of go around making a show, spending lots of money. They go to the saloons, they go to the brothels, they get suits. They don't come across as people who need to steal money or who are lacking in money. They spend the morning in a saloon near the bank and kind of keep an eye on it, and they wait until they see one of the tellers leave, meaning that there's only one man left on duty. Then two men stay outside to keep watch and two other men go in. We're not sure who goes in. We're assuming Butch and somebody else. None of them wear a mask or cover their face or anything like that, so they're easily identifiable. One man goes to the bank teller and he presents a check and says that he needs to cash it. And as the teller goes to take the check, whoever the outlaw is, grabs his head and thumps it onto the desk, no doubt knocking him out. And then all four men, the two men from outside, come in, and all four men ransack the bank. They steal around $21,000, which is the equivalent to $635,000 in today's money. And then they flee to Robber's Roost, but not before a number of people recognise Cassidy and Warner as they make their escape. Now, it's worth just talking quickly about Robber's Roost. Robber's Roost is an outlaw hideout mostly used by Butch Cassidy and his Wild Bunch gang, but other outlaws used it as well, and it's considered ideal because of the rough terrain. It's easily defended, difficult to navigate into without detection, and just excellent for when they needed a month or longer to rest and lie low. They can stack loads of stuff there. They can keep numerous people up there. The gang constructs cabins inside Robber's Roost to help shield them from the harsh winters and store weapons, horses, chicken, and even cattle. And it's never discovered by the pursuing lawmen of the day. It's a really secure place. So again, if you imagine all the Westerns when you've got the outlaws sort of at the top of this rocky outcrop firing down on people, that's where exactly right, like Robber's Roost. Again, I'll try and find a picture of it to share. So in 1890, Cassidy purchases a ranch on the outskirts of Dubois, Wyoming, across the state from the notorious Hole in the Wall, which is another hideout for gangs and outlaws. And it's a natural geological formation in the rock. And we don't know whether Cassidy was seriously ranching, whether it was just a kind of cover for other activities that were going on. We don't know if he was in touch and working with other outlaws using the Hole in the Wall. He's never financially successful at ranching, but for 4 years he lives the life of a law-abiding citizen. And he grew up on a ranch. It is his original business. It's what he was trained in. We know he's good with horses and cattle. So, it could be that that's what he was trying to do. In early 1894, Cassidy becomes romantically involved with another rancher and outlaw, Ann Bassett. And her father is a rancher who did a lot of business with Cassidy, supplying with him with fresh horses and beef. And it's not long after he takes up with Anne that Butch gets back into trouble with the law, this time in Lander, Wyoming, for stealing horses and possibly running a protection racket among the local ranchers there. Now, he's imprisoned in Wyoming State Prison where he serves 18 months of a 2-year sentence. He's a model prisoner, and he's liked by everyone. He's really jovial and pleasant, and he not only persuades them to release him early, but he gets pardoned in January 1896 by Governor William Alford Richards, and he's released. But he goes straight out to his friends at the hole in the wall. There's no deviation. He's straight back out to it. And he has gathered quite the selection of criminal buddies. At its biggest, there are around 30 members in his gang. His closest friend is William Ellsworthy, Elsie Lay, who's actually his bestie, not Sundance as everyone believes. Elsie is his ride or die. Harvey Kid Curry Logan, Ben the Tall Texan Kilpatrick, Harry Tracy, Will Newscarver, if anyone who, like me, is obsessed with the Old West, Laura Bullion, and George Curry, who collectively become the so-called Wild Bunch. Now, the reason I think I like him so much is that Butch is not a violent man. He's really friendly and helpful to his neighbours. That's not to say he doesn't carry a gun and fire it, but he never, as far as we know, Butch never kills anyone until the last minute, and he's often seen to be firing his gun into the air as a sort of distraction and a threat rather than actually shooting anyone. And there are numerous times where it probably would have bettered him to shoot the person he's dealing with and to let them get away and raise the alarm. He never does it. And yeah, his neighbours, wherever he is, he makes friends with his neighbours. He gets on with people. And yeah, it's usually, although obviously stealing isn't good, it's usually another member of the Wild Bunch or whoever he's with who will be killing people, and that's what really goes down badly. So on the 13th of August 1896, Cassidy, his best bud Lay, Logan and Bob Meeks ride into Montpelier, Idaho. They tie up their horses outside the bank. Two of them then pull their bandanas up over their faces, get out their guns and go inside. So they find a number of customers and 3 cashiers, and they order all except for one cashier to line up against the wall. So Cassidy then keeps his gun trained on those against the wall, and the other man helps the cashier fill the bags with money, and they escape with roughly $7,000, which is about $249,000 in today's money. Cassidy orders everyone to remain where they are for 10 minutes before raising the alarm, and so this all goes really well. But it's not long after this robbery that Cassidy recruits Harry Alonzo Longbow into the gang. Now, you may think you don't know who he is, but he's more often called the Sundance Kid. So let's have a little bit of background on him. Born in Montclair, Pennsylvania, in 1867, to Pennsylvania natives Josiah and Anne Longbow. He was the youngest of 5 children, and when he's 15, he travels to help his cousin George settle in a homestead near Cortez, Colorado. And while he's there, he finds work as a wrangler in a neighbouring ranch, and he learns to buy and breed horses. He left Cortez in 1886 and struck out on his own, working at ranches, drifting north until he finally finds work at the N-Bar N Ranch in Montana. So he gets laid off there because there's a really hard winter of 86, 87, and he drifts up to the Black Hills and then returns to try and find work at the N-Bar N Ranch again. And the first we know of him getting into trouble is in 1887 when he travels across to the 3V Ranch near Sundance in Wyoming, and he steals a gun, horse and a saddle from a cowboy, and he's caught by authorities in Miles City, Montana, and sentenced to 18 months in jail. And it's here that he's given the nickname the Sundance Kid. And like Butch, after his release, he goes back to working as a ranch hand at one of the largest commercial ranches of all time. He becomes joint owner of a saloon in the Grand Central Hotel in Calgary, but he quarrels with his partner and heads off back to Montana again, and there He gets back to work at the N-Bar-N, and there he begins rustling cattle and horses in Montana and Canada. And then at some point he bumps into Butch. So he's also seems like someone who, although he tries to go straight a couple of times, he just gets drawn back into what he's good at, which is a life of crime, sadly. So we're back in 1897, and as a rule, because Butch is reasonably well known and recognisable in Utah, he tries to avoid committing crimes there as much as possible. After the Montpelier Bank robbery, the Royal Bunch hired out at Robber's Roost, planning their next move, and in April 1897, they planned to ambush a small group of men carrying the payroll of the Pleasant Valley Coal Company in the mining town of Castlegate, Utah. Now, the reason that Butch is breaking his no Utah crime rule is that this is the largest coal mine in the Carbon County of Utah, and it's located right between Robber's Roost and the Browns Hole, which is another great outlaw hideout. So it's kind of bang slap in the middle of two places that these outlaws know really well. They know that they can hide. It's a big corporation, which Butch always likes to target, and, you know, it's kind of right under their nose. It would almost be rude not to. So it's not an easy job, though. To avoid an ambush, the payroll's always sent out on different days and at different times, and no one knows when these are going to be. So Butch decides to steal it straight from the paymaster as soon as it comes in. And to do this, he still needs to know when that money's going to be arriving. So on the 17th of April, Butch goes to a saloon in town where he asks around for work as a ranch hand. He's told there might be work if he can be patient, and he just needs to hang around, which is exactly what he needs. So he wanders off to the train depot and he watches the comings and goings of the trains. He notes what's coming in when and what's leaving when, and then he returns to the saloon. And he does this every day. And nobody bats an eyelash because they know that he's looking for work as a ranch hand. And he makes sure that he watches every single train that comes into town. Now, on the 22nd of April, a whistle from a mine announces that it's payday. Butch's patience is going to be paid off. Butch watches the paymaster and a couple of men go to the train, carry bags of money back to the office. The bags are incredibly heavy, and so they're carrying these big bags of silver and gold coin, and they are taking them to the steps of the office, and then they're going to do a second stint where they carry them all from the bottom of the steps to the top of the steps. But when they're all at the bottom of the steps, the paymaster feels a revolver in his back, and Butch says that he and his men are going to be relieving them of their heavy load, apparently adding that he would hate to have to shoot any of them. And then Elsie Lay appears and comes to help carry the silver and gold. But something spooks Butch's horse, leaving him stranding in the middle of the street with a bag of stolen gold in his hand. Lay manages to find his horse, brings it back, and they make a getaway to Robber's Roost. But by this time, the paymaster has started shouting that there's a robbery and is causing a hoo-ha, so it's not ideal. They do manage to get over $7,000 in gold, which is fairly incredible. They leave a bag of silver just sitting in the street. And yeah, the paymaster is shouting that he's been robbed. And it's really worth noting here that Butch does not shoot him, which would perhaps have been a sensible move because obviously he's rousing suspicions. A lot of men working at the mine did not speak English, so they wouldn't necessarily have known what was happening. But this is all taking place in broad daylight. So once someone starts shouting and pointing and all of that, you're going to draw attention to people. You're going to draw attention to what's going on. And that could have had serious consequences for Butch and Elsie. So It's notable that he doesn't, just as soon as the paymaster starts shouting, shoot him to shut him up. So the paymaster reports the robbery as quickly as he can, but the phone lines have been cut. We're assuming they've been cut by Butch, but there's no evidence to say that. So he has to get back onto the train that his money's just arrived on to get to the sheriff. And whilst on the train, he overtakes Butch and Elsie as they're fleeing. But they know the terrain so well that they evade capture. And they get some help from local ranchers. They get some fresh horses from local ranchers who just don't have any loyalty to this big mining company and actually quite like some of that gold that Butch has got. So again, with the Robin Hood thing, he's never stealing from small businesses. He's never stealing from fellow ranchers. He's always there to help his neighbours and be kind. He's not a violent man. So it kind of helps him along the way because no one's going to report him and no one can get to the hideout. However, the local papers become aware that the lawmen know where the outlaws are hiding, but they're reluctant to go to Robber's Roost. So, understandably, if you go to Robber's Roost, you're just going to get picked off. There's no way of doing it safely, but the local papers accuse the lawmen of cowardice, and this does nothing to endear the charming Butch and his gang to the police. So the gang lay low for 3 months up in Robber's Roost, and then they emerge to spend their swag. They go into town, they get new clothes, haircuts, they go and visit the local brothels and saloons, and by June, they're planning their next robbery. So the next place on Butch's list is the Butte County Bank, and he chooses Sundance to lead this one. He doesn't go. And though the 3 men follow the usual procedure of someone waiting outside, everyone going in, all the customers being made to line up against the wall, someone outside passing by sees what's going on and raises the alarm and sort of shouts down the street that there's a bank robbery going on. Now the street clears, some people go home to hide, quite a lot of people go home to get their guns, and the bandits realise what's happening, and they decide to leave, and they fire their guns into the air, they run for their horses, but some of the townspeople return fire, and one of the men, Tom O'Day, is captured trying to disappear down a side street. He's kept in the bank vault overnight and then transported to the jail in Deadwood to have his sentence meted out to him by Lovejoy. This is a very niche 80s British joke there, but I couldn't help it. So this robbery, they managed to get $97 instead of the $3,000 that they knew were sitting in the bank. On the 2nd of June 1899, the gang robbed a Union Pacific Overland Flyer passenger train near Wilcox, Wyoming. 2 of the gang flagged down the train using red lanterns, which is usually a sign of warning to the driver. So the driver stops, assuming that there's a problem on the line ahead. And when he saw their guns, he jumps off the train. He runs down the track to warn the train behind to slow down, not to crash into them. Again, the robbers let him go. They don't shoot him, even though it possibly would have been better for them. And the robbers get onto the train, ordering the engineer to pull over into a nearby siding. They then blow up the bridge so the train behind them won't be able to follow, and force the engineer to drive a further 2 miles down the track to where the rest of the gang are waiting. The guard won't open the door, so they blow it open, and he is so shocked that he then can't remember how to get into the safe. So they blow the safe open, which makes money fly everywhere. But they get away with over $50,000 in gold, silver, jewellery. And it's this robbery that earns them a real great amount of notoriety, and it makes the national papers, and it results in a massive manhunt. Many notable lawmen take part in the manhunt, but they don't find them, including the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. Now, Kid Curry and George Curry have a shootout with lawmen following the train robbery, and they kill Sheriff Joe Hazen. Kid Curry is one who is quite trigger happy and happy to kill people. He is the one from the gang who seems to be the one that kills the most people. So Tom Horn is a killer for hire employed by the Pinkerton Agency, and he is told by explosive expert Bill Speck that Hazen's been shot, and so the Pinkerton Agency send Detective Charlie Siringo to capture the outlaws. Now, Siringo cleverly befriends the common law wife of Kid Curry's brother and tries to locate the gang through her. Now, on the 11th of July 1899, Lay and others are involved in a Colorado and Southern Railroad train robbery near Folsom, New Mexico, which Cassidy might have planned and personally directed, but he wasn't, as far as we know, involved. So a shootout ensues with local law enforcement, during which Lay kills Sheriff Edward Farr and Henry Love, and Lay gets caught, convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment in the New Mexico State Penitentiary. Interestingly, he gets pardoned in 1906 for helping stop a prison riot, but that's the end of his involvement with the Wild Bunch, and the Wild Bunch itself typically separates following a robbery. They go in different directions and they reunite at a predetermined location, such as the Hole in the Wall, Robber's Roost, or Fanny Porter's brothel in San Antonio. The sociable, good-natured Butch is growing tired of the outlaw life, and he just is sick of being a wanted man. It's an uncomfortable way to live if you're someone who's kind of outgoing and a people person. So in 1899, he approaches Utah Governor Herbert Wells to negotiate an amnesty. He points out he's never hurt anyone, he's only ever robbed from large corporations, and Wells advises him to ask the Union Pacific Railroad to drop their criminal complaints against him. And the Union Pacific chairman E.H. Harriman attempts to meet with Cassidy through Warner. However, one of the parts of the deal says that Butch must have now standing murder warrants against him. Now, Butch isn't concerned about this. He's never shot anyone. He thinks it's a shoo-in. But they unearth an outstanding warrant for his arrest for murder. And even though he hasn't committed the crime, Wells says the fact that there's a warrant is enough and the amnesty can't happen. So it's back to a life of crime for Butch. And on the 28th of February 1900, lawmen attempting to arrest Lonnie Logan at his aunt's home results in Lonnie being killed in the shootout and his cousin Bob Lee arrested for rustling and sent to prison in Wyoming. On the 28th of March, George Curry and News Carver are pursued by a posse from St. John's, Apache County, Arizona, after using currency they'd stolen at the Wilcox train robbery. The posse engages them in a shootout, and deputies Andrew Gibbons and Frank Lasser are killed, though Carver and Curry escape. However, on the 17th of April, George Curry is killed in a shootout with Grand County, Utah Sheriff John Tyler and Deputy Sam Jenkins. And on the 26th of May, Kid Curry rides into Moab, Utah, and kills both Tyler and Jenkins in another shootout as retaliation for the deaths of George and Lonnie, his brothers. On the 29th of August, 1900, Butch, Sundance and others robbed the Union Pacific train number 3 near Tipton in Wyoming. And then in December, Butch posed alongside Sundance, Logan, Carver and Ben Kilpatrick in Fort Worth, Texas. They'd all been out to the bars, they'd got new suits, they'd got haircuts, they're feeling really spiffy, and they have this photo, which is the now famous Fort Worth 5 photograph. I love this photograph, but sadly, it's then used by the Pinkerton Agency to make up wanted posters. It's really clear, good photo. So Butch and Sundance flee to New York City. They feel the continuous pressure from numerous law enforcement agencies pursuing them. And on the 20th of February 1901, they boarded the British steamer Hermanus, bound for Argentina. They take with them Sundance's girlfriend, Etta Place, played by the beautiful Catherine Ross in the film. Now, Cassidy poses as James Ryan, Place's fictitious brother, and on arrival, they settle in a 4-room log cabin on a 17,000-acre ranch that they've bought. The first thing Cassidy does when he lands in Argentina is put $12,000 into an Argentinian bank account. So they then purchase this ranch on the east bank of the Rio Blanco near Cholila, and they appear to their neighbours to be hardworking ranchers. We know how jovial and nice Butch is, so he gets on really well in the community. But suspicions are raised about them because these two men always carry their guns. Now, they always carry their guns because they know that the Pinkerton Agency are after them and they're a serious agency. They're hoping that in Argentina they're safe, but they're not taking any chances. In the film, Butch and Sundance will always be saying, "Who are those guys?" And with good reason. But they have a right to be worried. The Pinkerton Agency has sent this picture of Butch and Sundance to the head of the police in Argentina, so they know. They're really easy to identify. They're the two Americans who always carry guns in town, so they're easily identified, but they are not doing anything illegal yet. So in a letter Butch writes to Elza Lay's mum in Utah, dated the 10th of August 1902, he describes him and Sundance and Etta as our little family of 3, living in a 4-room house with 300 cattle, 1,500 sheep and 28 horses. And they remain that way. They're under surveillance from the Cholila police that they don't know about, but they're popular in the local community, they're working hard, they're above board, and they do this for 5 years until they, for some reason, decide to return to a life of crime. But it's all really vague because obviously they've been identified, but these people are always described now as 2 English-speaking bandits. So, it's probably them. Might not be. 2 English-speaking bandits hold up the Banco di Tarapacia in Argentino in Rio Gallegos on the 14th of February 1905, and then they vanish north across the Patagonian grasslands. Butch and Sundance sell the Cholila ranch on the 1st of May, fearing that law enforcement have tracked them down. And in fact, the Pinkerton Agency have known about their location for some time, but the snow and hard winter of Patagonia had prevented them from making any arrest. Governor Julio Lizana issued an arrest warrant, but Sheriff Edward Humphreys, who's a Welsh Argentine who is buddies with Cassidy and he's in love with Etta, tips them off. So the trio flee north to San Carlos, and then they embark on a steamer across the lake and into Chile. They return to Argentina by the end of the year. Butch, Sundance, Etta, and an unknown male associate rob the National Bank in Villa Mercedes on the 19th of December, 400 miles west of Buenos Aires, taking 12,000 pesos. Unfortunately, the unnamed accomplice shoots a bank teller, so they have to really go on the lam. And it's the same as with the Wild Bunch. It's one thing to be robbing places, it's one thing to be robbing banks. No one felt particularly loyal to banks. There was no policing and law as we know it now. Robbing a massive corporation was not so much of a problem. Shooting someone was, and that's where it gets really murky for Butch and Sundance, because those guys, Sundance by all accounts is a fantastic shot, the best, but he never shoots anyone. And on the 30th of June 1906, Etta's had enough. She's had enough of life on the run. Sundance takes her back to San Francisco, and Butch obtains honest work under the name James Santiago Maxwell in the tin mine in the Santa Vera Cruz range of the central Bolivian Andes. And Sundance joins him there when he's back from San Francisco. And their main duties here include guarding the company payroll. And I cannot decide if this is the best or worst job for them. But they travel to Santa Cruz in 1907, which is a frontier town in Bolivia's eastern savannah. And they're still wanting to settle down as respectable ranchers. But again, it wouldn't last for long, and who knows what would have happened if they'd retired into ranching life at this point. The Pinkerton Agency were after them, but I'm not sure if they would have got to Bolivia or traced them to Bolivia, but it's not going to go well. A courier is carrying the payroll from the Arameo Franque and Cia Silver mine on the 3rd of November 1908 near the small mining town of San Vicente in southern Bolivia, and he's attacked by 2 masked American bandits believed to be Butch and Sundance. Witnesses see them 3 days later in San Vicente, where they've lodged in a small boarding house owned by a miner called Bonifacio Casola. Casola becomes suspicious of them because they have a mule from the mine that's identifiable by the mine's brand, which seems sloppy to me. And he notifies the nearby telegraph officer, who then notifies the nearby cavalry regiment, which is stationed really close by, and they dispatch 3 soldiers under the command of Captain Justo Concha, and he in turn notifies the local authorities. So the soldiers, the police chief, the local mayor, and some of his officials all surround the lodgings house on the evening of the 6th of November, intending to arrest the robbers. But as they approach the house, the bandits open fire, killing one of the soldiers and wounding another, and starting a gunfight which lasted for several hours into the evening and night. Sundance was rumoured to be excellent with a gun, but this is the first time there's any indication of either men killing anyone. Up until this point, neither of them have killed anyone. And there's also, stories has such a grey area. There are numerous versions of it. The most accepted one is that Sundance makes a break for it across the yard to get some rifles that are leaning up against a wall, and he fires his revolvers into the air to run a distraction, but he is shot down. Butch runs out to pull his friend to safety, himself getting shot in the process. And at around 2 a.m, during a lull in the fighting, the mayor hears a man scream 3 times inside the house, and then 2 successive shots were fired. So the authorities wait until the next morning when they enter the house, and they find 2 bodies with numerous bullet wounds in the arms and legs. The man assumed to be Sundance had wounds in his arms and legs and a bullet wound in his forehead, and the man thought to be Cassidy had a bullet hole in his temple. The local police report speculated that, judging from the positions of the bodies, Cassidy had probably shot the fatally wounded Sundance to put him out of his misery and then killed himself with the final bullet. The Topeka police identified the bandits as the men who'd robbed the payroll transport, but the Bolivian authorities did not know their real names, nor could they positively identify them. And this is where the whole load of conspiracy theories about Butch and Sundance come from, because they are never formally identified by anyone who knew them. So the 2 bodies are buried at the small San Vicente cemetery near the grave of German miner named Gustav Zimmer, which is important because that's the only way they've got unmarked graves because nobody knew who they were. So that's all we have to go on as to where they could possibly be. But the thing is, there's no actual evidence to link Butch and the Sundance Kid to the robbery or the shootout, and many people believe that the men somehow escaped, returned to America, and lived out the rest of their lives quietly. The thing is, if we've learned anything from this story, it's that these men cannot just sit back and have a nice time on a ranch and not get into trouble. And I also think that had Sundance returned to the US, he probably would have gone to find Etta. He loved her enough that he took her back to San Francisco safely. So I'm fairly sure someone would have checked up on that. And also, we know how personable and nice Butch Cassidy was. He doesn't seem like someone who could just live in solitude. Now, there's another version of this story which has them being killed by soldiers in Uruguay during a bank robbery, and another story of Butch returning alone to the US and living out his days in obscurity in Alaska. When the 1969 film came out, reporters returned to Circleville to track down any remaining relatives to Butch, and they found his 86-year-old sister, Lula Parker Bettinson, who's his youngest sister, and she told reporters that Butch had not died in South America in 1909, but he'd come back to visit her some 16 years later in 1925, and that he'd come back and died in Spokane in Washington in 1937 and had spent his last years as a trapper and prospector. However, she has been discovered to be somewhat flamboyant in her memories, and she's not a reliable source, apparently. Some scholars have studied Butch and found evidence showing that he faked his death in San Vicente in Bolivia, and they suggested that after making it big in the Bolivian train payroll and bank robberies, Cassidy sailed to Europe, got a facelift, moved back to America, married, and then became an entrepreneur in Washington. Now, there is rumoured to be a detailed manuscript about Cassidy that appears to have been written by Cassidy. But again, this is a very shady info that no one can confirm. American forensic anthropologist Clyde Snow and his researchers attempted to find the graves in 1991, but they didn't find any remains with DNA matching the living relatives of Butch and Sundance. In 2017, a new search was launched for Cassidy's grave, which zeroed in on the mine outside Good Springs, Nevada. The dig found human remains, but they did not match the DNA provided. And that is the story of Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. Quite a long one, but I don't know why I feel so emotionally attached to them, because they just seem like nice guys. Yes, they're robbing people. That is never good. But I wonder what made them decide that this time they weren't going to prison. They'd both been to prison before, probably wasn't very nice, but Butch at least had been able to talk himself out of a long sentence before. So you kind of think, I don't know what the penalties were for being caught robbing a payroll in Argentina, and maybe that was, or Bolivia, and whether that was more severe, but it just seems weird that they suddenly were like, no, we're going out in a blaze of glory, neither having, as far as we can tell, ever killed a man before. Let me know whether you enjoyed that. I was aware that last week we had quite a hefty murder case. I don't want it to be too murdery, and I love finding out about different people from history. As always, I will try and put up as many pictures as I can on social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok at The Monday Night Revue. You can email us at themondaynightrevue@gmail.com, and you can find us on Patreon. Big shout out to everyone who is on Patreon. You can get ad-free episodes, extra stories, and now you can get mini-sodes. And until next week, be kind, stay safe, and always check that back seat before you drive.